Okay, so it's Friday morning, and we're going to talk about complementarity modeling and deriving some optimality conditions. So there's going to be some parts that maybe are a little bit heavy in math, but it shouldn't last for more than 20 minutes. So if you if you hold on during that part, then we'll have a break afterwards. Hopefully you won't all fall asleep. So I don't know your background, all of you, so I decided to still make this quite basic. Well, to start with the basics of complementarity modeling, just so that we all have the same understanding. So if you're already an expert, good for you. And if you're not, hopefully at the end, you'll have the same background and understand what complementarity modeling is. And then we'll talk about some applications in electricity markets. Okay, so since it is still early, I thought we would start with some motivation. So I wanted to play a game with you first. You probably all know how to play poker, right? So I would need 1 or 2 volunteers to play with me. Yeah, I have one here. Oh, you raised your hands. Yeah? Yeah, come. All right, does somebody want to play against him? Am I playing against? Okay. Yeah. Do you want to come? So we're gonna play poker, the two of you, right? So I already distributed some cards. You each have, so you can be the first player and you're the second player. Good poker face. I saw that. So this is completely random. So you each have 5 cards, rules of poker, in case nobody remembers them. You're trying to make the best hand possible to beat your opponent. These are the best hands ranked, right? So you each have 1 round. You first, where you can exchange between 0 and 5 of your cards with. Yes, well, you can, discard and then pick. How many would you like to? Just 1?
We exchange, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just 1.
You don't want 2?
Sure. I don't know, it doesn't sound very random.
Should I pick somebody who can play poker?
Okay,
2?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent choice. Okay. Yeah, you can look at them and hopefully you have a better hand now.
I don't know.
I also don't know. What about you? Do you want to exchange any card?
I go for 4.
4?
If you allow me.
All right, yep. I'll give you 4. Okay.
Poker face.
All right.
I see this was very, very prepared.
Was this?
I should have definitely asked for 1 only.
Yeah. Do you want to ask for 1 card?
Yeah, if my leg doesn't mind.
That's okay, go ahead.
I gave him an excellent hand and then he messed it up. Give me this card back.
I mean, I saw the hint on the cards, but
So actually, you wanted 1 card. Did you?
yeah, I got the card. The card.
Okay, yeah. All right. So, all right. So now, are you willing to bet who won this round?
5? Is that out of 5, right? We're out of 5? How much are we bidding? Are we bidding or betting?
In
Betting?
which currency?
Okay, like who's gonna win?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm gonna win.
Are you folding or are you?
I'm pretty confident I could win. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. Okay. Let's see what you guys got.
4 aces and a king.
Wow. You're so good at playing.
Oh, wait, I think
straight
that's...
flush
Oh.
for me.
Wow.
Wow, okay.
Oh.
Damn.
It's very different from what I got in my first attempt.
It's optimization.
Okay, so right. What were the hands that you got at the beginning, right? So, no, way too far ahead. Okay, yeah. So you had this, and you had this.
It's random. How do you know?
I'm a magician, right? So you decided to exchange 2 cards, right? Hopefully to maximize your odds of getting 4 of a kind. And you exchanged then 1. And you got pretty lucky, you got a straight flush, right? So since you didn't know what he could pick, right, that was a pretty good strategy, obviously. Like that was a good play. So the thing is, the cards in the deck were also very random, what they picked. So these were the cards that were in the deck, right? So the first 2 ones, you got this king and this ace, and then the card he exchanged, he got this 5, right? Which gave him a straight flush and then beat your 4 aces. So now that you know this, you were the one who played first, right? So would you change your strategy at all? Is there any way you could beat him?
Pick all 5. Take all 5. So that way. Or
Yeah, you could pick all 5. I guess you could also just pick 1, right? Which is what you wanted to do in the first place. So if you picked 1, right, then you would have picked the king, and that would have given you full house also. And then he, if he had exchanged 1, then he would have gotten this ace, and I guess that would have given him a straight. No, not a straight.
2 threes and
Royal.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I should have put another ace. So yeah, if you had picked 3, for example, right, then you could have gotten still 3 aces, and he wouldn't have gotten anything. He would have gotten 2 pairs. So my point is, like, when you play poker, obviously you don't know what's in the deck. You have no way of knowing, and so your best strategy was just informed by the cards you had and some basic knowledge of probability. You guys can go back if you want. You don't have to stay here the whole time. So that was a good best strategy, right? So, but one of the characteristic of this game is that whatever you decided when you played first, you kind of influenced then the best strategy of the other one and what the second player could get, right? So if you had known its possible reaction and the possible outcomes he would have based on your strategy, then you could have played better, and you could have played by anticipating then their reaction and their best strategy, right? So without knowing anything, if you were to model this, right, if you had no information, you could solve, I guess, an optimization problem with some uncertainty and maximize your expected gains, right? But if you know the response of the second player and how your strategy is going to impact them, right, how would you then model your strategy? Can you model this just as one optimization problem? Yeah.
For example, what I was thinking when I decided to take the ball is that my highest probability of scoring, because I have in my initial play I have 0. So my highest probability of scoring something was getting a couple with the cube, which is high value, or something else that would come along. Which actually, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, it's a good point for you. You were reacting, so like your strategy wasn't impacting him, right? So for you, it was purely an optimization problem. What was your highest probability, right? So yeah, that's the best strategy you could go for. For you, once you knew what he had, what he could win, right? You changed your strategy. You wanted to anticipate what he would do, but what he would do is an optimization problem itself, right? So now you're not solving just one optimization problem, you're trying to find the optimal solution for two optimization problem, right? That have some conditions that they have to meet simultaneously for you to win, right? So this is not something you can model with just one optimization problem. And that's where complementarity modeling can help you, right? So it's very helpful to generalize kind of optimization for decision making when you're in the situation where you have multiple decision makers and agents that must satisfy certain joint optimality conditions together and to model this type of decisions. So what we're going to learn then is how you could have modeled this type of problem mathematically, and if you are the first player specifically, right, how you could have optimized your chances of winning. So why do we care about this? Not just to play some games and gamble, but also we are in energy markets summer school, so this is also something that's very useful in modern energy systems, right? Traditionally, you all know that you would have, vertically integrated systems, so you'd have one central planner that would solve some large optimization problem to design or operate the system and maximize or minimize some objective that they have. So some type of decision problem they might solve. It could be OPF problem, it could be investment problem, it could be a market, not quite. It could be any recovery optimization problem, so as long as they are the main decision maker, right? But this is not quite the case anymore. In liberalized system, now we have a deregulated system and competitive, so we have multiple decision makers that are each trying to optimize different objectives, and they are doing that either simultaneously or one after the other. But the main thing is that whatever decisions one of them make will impact also the others, their objective or their constraint. So to solve this kind of decision-making problem, then we need to model these linked decision and strategies among different users. And this is particularly true in electricity markets, for example, where we have self-interested agents that are each trying to maximize their own profit or minimize their cost. And they all participate in the same market, so the decision will impact the others. So this is what we're going to look at today, how complementarity modeling can help us model different problems for these agents and find out what the state of the system is and the outcomes of the market are based on these models. So we're going to first introduce kind of what complementarity is, look at it from the perspective of a single optimization problem, how you can use it to derive optimality conditions on these optimization problems. And then we're going to look at two cases where you have multiple decision makers, either that are playing simultaneously or that are playing one after the other, and see how you can model those decisions using complementarity modeling. And then going to have some applications also that are more related to some research topics that I've been working on recently. So hopefully we still have time for this. So let's start with how complementarity modeling helps you derive optimality condition for a single optimization problem. So how many of you are familiar with these optimality condition? Yeah, at least a couple. Okay. Okay, then maybe it was a good choice to have some recap. So we're going to be in the context of electricity markets, right? So let's just give quick overview of how electricity markets are solved and why it's an optimization problem. Right? So the market operator, we're in a liberalist power system. What they're trying to do is to find a market mechanism that coordinates the response of the multiple market participants and incentivizes them to make decisions that are beneficial for the system as a whole. Right? That's the whole thing they're trying to do. So how do you do that for electricity? So electricity is a commodity. It means that if you have multiple producers, it doesn't matter who produced the electricity. It is the same product. Right? You don't have different qualities to the electricity, and you can't really trace the electron in the first place. So it's slightly different than other commodities, and that impacts how the electricity market is designed. The first one, I guess, is that you have to transport electricity on transmission and distribution networks. So the way it is distributed and dispatched has to follow some physical laws of the network. But we're looking at European markets specifically, just to make it a bit simple in this example. So here we don't solve actually an optimal power flow problem in the markets. So we neglect all those constraints and we assume they're not binding. So this is a slightly simpler problem. We don't have to take this into account for now in our example. But whatever we're presenting, you could straightforwardly generalize it if you had some network constraints in the market. The second characteristic, which you all know, is that you can't easily store electricity at a very large scale. So the electricity markets are always trying to keep the balance between supply and demand at all time. And that's why they're usually organized as multiple market platforms from months or days ahead to the real time and the time of delivery to try to match this supply and demand. But we're just going to look at one platform, one simplified kind of like, a toy model of one of those electricity market platform. So we just look at a simple day-ahead electricity market in which consumers and producers are participating. So we just have one stage of this market. But you can keep in mind that actually it is a multiple stage decisions. So just a small example of what that would look like. Let's assume we have two consumers and two generators. So each one of those market participants has a price at which they're willing to buy or sell electricity and a quantity that they would like to buy or sell, right? So for the generators, that is their production cost and their capacity. And for the consumers, it's a willingness to pay or the utility they derive from consuming this electricity. So how do we clear the market if we have those four market participants, right? Well, the first thing we do is we order the demand into a demand curve from the one that is the most willing to pay to the one that is the least willing to pay. And we do the same thing for the generators by deriving a supply curve. Wherever this supply and demand curves meet is where we clear the market, right? So in this case, generator 1 is willing to sell 125 megawatt hour of electricity at a fairly low price. And since this price is lower than what the first and second consumers are willing to pay, then they sell that electricity to them. Generator 2 is too expensive, so they're out of the market. They're not selling anything. And in electricity markets, one interesting thing to notice is that we derive one single price for all those trades, right? So even though generator 1 was willing to, so even though consumer 1 was willing to pay 40 euro, right? They will only pay at the price of the highest generator that has been dispatched. So everybody pays and receives the same price for electricity. And based on this, you can see the social welfare of this market. So what's the social welfare? It's the consumer's surplus. So it's the difference between what they were willing to pay and what they end up paying. And the producer's profit, which is also the difference between what they wanted to receive and what they actually receive. In this case, the producer's profit is 0 because generator 1 wanted 15 euros and they're receiving 15 euro per megawatt hour. Yeah.
Standard model for like whatever you bid, everyone pays the same price, or is it different based on markets?
There are some other markets that have different rules. There are some, so this would be, I guess, a pay as cleared or uniform price. In the case of nodal prices, it's similar except that you have one price per node. So, but there are also pay as bid markets. So there were some for ancillary service in Europe. So whatever you bid is what you receive. That does change your strategy quite a lot. So the idea with this design is that this rent that the producers would receive means, you know, they are the most efficient producers, so they would invest this eventually to develop, to build more of this technology. So in the long run, this rent that they receive is also beneficial, right? So it's, I mean, there's been some debate also in the EU with, you know, gas being the ones setting the price. Don't need to get into that, but yeah, now most markets in Europe are organized like this. So we're going to see also maybe why and what kind of desirable properties this have in a moment. But yeah, so the idea is that this design would maximize this area, which is the social welfare. Yeah.
In this case, the D1 and D2 will not be completely served.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, D1 is completely served here, but not D2, because what they bid, the willingness to pay was too low, right? So if they were a very inflexible load, then they would have either bid a very high price, or they could also buy at any price, or at the maximum market price. But it's just to have an example. It's true a lot of loads would be quite inflexible, but it's just to have an example of both like generators and consumers bidding. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the idea for the market designer is to maximize this area that is the social welfare. Yeah.
Because not the two loads are met, so that would still that the second load they didn't make the requirements. And also, wouldn't the second generation make a loss, because if the social welfare has the producer's profit, generator 2 didn't make any.
So generator 2 made no profit there, right? They're not producing anything. It's not a loss, it's a zero. I guess in this case, you consider only the operational costs, right, of the generators.
You do the rest of the requirements at the lower price.
So if they were forced to do this, right, to sell to D2 at 20 euro, then they would be making a loss, right, because their production cost is 30. So for each unit, they would be losing 10 euros. In the other hand, if then you also dispatch generator 2 at the price it asked, then the consumer 2 would be making a loss, right? Because they would be forced to buy at a higher price. So if you did serve D2 fully, regardless of, I guess, the price that you would set, right, then somebody would be making some loss, and the social welfare would be lower than it is now, right? But, I mean, yes, unserved load is bad in general, right? In this case, this is a toy example where you have two loads that are quite flexible because they're bidding, you know, at fairly low prices. So it means they're willing to have their load not served if the price is too high, right? This is not a consumer that would, that's not somebody in their household that would be bidding this, right? So in this case, yeah, the social welfare would be maximized when you don't fully serve some of this load. This can be formulated as a simple optimization problem, right? We have just one central market operator that is trying to maximize the social welfare of the system. So I could formulate this as an optimization problem where I would want to so this is from the perspective of the market operator, right? So their optimization problem is to maximize the social welfare, which is, again, the consumer surplus plus the producer profit, subject to a number of constraints. So the first constraint is the power balance, so that whatever is bought is the same as whatever is sold in the market, because you're not storing some of this electricity, right? And then the other constraints are just the limits on the quantity that the generators can sell, and the limits also on the quantity that the consumers can buy, right? Which is based on how much they wanted to buy or sell in the first place. So this is a very simple economic dispatch problem, is how we would call it. It's similar to an optimal power flow, except we don't have network constraints, so we just have one global power balance for the whole system instead of one power balance at each node of the system. So I can formulate this simply. The social welfare that I want to maximize is the sum of the utility derived by the consumers minus the sum of the cost incurred by the producers. This is what you would want to maximize. So if the consumers are fully inflexible and they're not participating in this market, what you would end up with is just minimizing the production cost of the generators. So this is just a slightly more general version of this. A power balance equality, in this case you've probably all seen one, supply matching demand. And then limits on the minimum and maximum production. In this case, the minimum production or consumption is 0, and the maximum is whatever bit they placed. So this means they might not be fully served, these loads, or the generators might not be fully dispatched, right? So this is a very simple linear optimization problem, right? In the case that we had earlier, this led to this dispatch again, and these prices. So if I solve this and I give you, this dispatch and this prices, how do you know that this is actually the optimal solution of this optimization problem? If you've solved an optimization problem, you should be quite convinced that you have the optimal solution when you... It's not a trick. Yeah, but if I just give you one value and I tell you this is the minimum, yeah.
The duality gap is
Yeah, okay. So what you're telling me is that you have some conditions that you can verify, and then if you verify those conditions, then you know you are at optimality. So yeah, the duality gap is one of them. So that's true when you have a convex problem with zero duality gap. So if I want to ensure that the solutions I get are truly optimal, I can derive some optimality conditions on those solutions that are necessary and sufficient, and that tells me if I meet those conditions on my solution, I know I have an optimal solution. So that is true when you have convex optimization problem with zero duality gap. So convex, I'm assuming we pretty much all know what that means. Zero duality gap, we're going to see what this means. So this is the part where we're going to start deriving some equations. And yeah.
I guess in this example you have multiple solutions, no?
Yes, you have multiple optimal, well, for the prices, yes. Yeah. For the primal solution, the dispatch, no, not in this case. But yeah, you're right.
What happens in the market when you have this situation? I mean, you can see it on the plot now that the price is a bit, you have some range in the price.
Yeah, I mean, you're correct. If I pick any price basically between like, right, 15 and 20, right, that would be correct. So I think in this case, you just pick basically the price that is the, that maximizes the consumer surplus, right, of all the prices. So this is what I did. Is that a rule in the markets? I'm not sure. uh, but yeah, this is how I picked then the price. But yeah.
I don't understand why you say you would have multiple prices, because isn't the price the sensitivity of the power balance constraint?
Yeah, but here you see, I mean, you have some non-linearity, right? So like the sensitivity, if you slightly increase the load or slightly decrease it, I guess would be different, right?
The conditions you have two different solutions for the dual variables. In this case, piecewise linear function, but then you have two solutions.
Yes.
The social welfare maximization, if you have, besides if the consumers are inelastic, you just minimize the total cost. What if some parts of the consumer consumption is flexible? And the other, do you model the consumption in separate parts?
Yeah, so what you could do, I guess there's two ways you could model this here. There's some, yeah. Okay, so for the consumers that are completely inflexible, either you model them as they bid the maximum price that's allowed to bid in the market, and then you can still model them as variables, right? But they will be dispatched unless there's not enough capacity, basically, right? And then another solution is to consider those as fixed parameters, so they're not bidding any cost. You would just add plus this inflexible load to the balance equation, so you would separate them. But then, yeah, if you don't have enough, I guess, capacity in the market, you could have, this could be infeasible, so you'd have to add some probably value of loss load and shedding, just to make sure that your optimization problem is feasible. Not that that's something that happens very often, right? I mean, in the market, not having load served because of a lack of capacity is not happening that often, especially in Europe. Yeah, but yeah, that would be a way to model it. Was there another question about the electricity market before we start just deriving some equations? Okay. It's 9:40, so hopefully we'll be done with this next part before the break. So what we're trying to do, just to keep the big picture, we're trying to find this optimality condition. If I satisfy them, then my solution is optimal. There might be multiple solutions, and then they would all satisfy the KKT conditions, right? All right, so what happens first if you have an optimization problem that is convex? So we want convex functions, and that is not constrained, right? Then it's quite easy to figure out where your optimal solution is. It's where the gradient is 0, right? So this is a simple case, but that's not the case we have, because we have constraints. What we're going to try to do is to kind of generalize this concept to when you have constraints. So one intuitive way to do this is to say, okay, I remove those constraints and somehow I add them to the objective function and penalize this objective function. And if I do that in a smart way, then I can derive some conditions on this new problem that generalize this first order condition. So this is what we're going to try to do in the next hopefully not more than 15 minutes of equations. So, all right, now I don't have an unconstrained problem, I have a convex problem, but with a number of inequality constraints. We're going to see at the end, if you have equality constraint, you can just generalize this. Also because equality constraints are just two inequality constraints. We're just going to derive all of this for inequality constraints only, because I think it's more intuitive. So we're trying to derive necessary and sufficient conditions for this constraint convex optimization problem. So this is my function, and this is the feasible space that these constraints derive, right? So you can see visually, in this case, the minimum is not going to be where the gradient is 0, and that's because of my constraints. So how can I derive those conditions? So we said one idea first is, what if I just relax those constraints and I add them to the objective function and penalize violating those constraints, right? So the strongest way to penalize this would be to add a step function to my objective that is 0 if I satisfy my constraints, and infinity if I don't satisfy my constraints, right? Then if I minimize this, we call it J function, this penalized function, then I really don't want to violate my constraints right now. So if I solve then this unconstrained problem of minimizing J, I am going to find the same optimal solution as if I was minimizing F over this feasible set, right? But, okay, this is equivalent, right? So it's good we have an unconstrained problem, but minimizing this stepwise function is not so easy. We would like to have something a bit smoother, right? This is a bit extreme. So we're going to try to find some smoother function that we could minimize. So one idea is that, okay, when I have a step function like this, I'm trying to relax this infinite step with some smoother functions, right, to penalize. The simplest way is just a linear function, right? So I could use this linear function instead of this step, this infinite step, to penalize constraint violation. What would happen is that in the region where I violate my constraint, then I penalize. But here also you can see that in the region where I satisfy my constraint, then this would actually reward me for satisfying those constraints, right? Contrary to the step function that was 0 if I satisfy the constraint. So that's not good, because that can impact the optimal solution within the feasible region. So we can't really use just this linear function. But if we look at, so this is a linear function for, mu would be a fixed parameter, right? That's the slope of my linear function. So for any positive mu, I could derive one of those penalty functions. Now, if I look at all the linear functions for all the positive values of mu, and I take the maximum value of this function, then what happens is that this is actually equal to this step function. So the maximum value of those simple linear functions for any positive slope becomes this step function. So in my original problem, right, what I was trying to do is to minimize this function j that had a step, an infinite step penalization. Then I could replace this infinite step by the maximum of this linear function, right, that penalizes, deviating from the constraints. So now what I'm doing, I'm saying, okay, what I can actually minimize is this unconstrained problem. But you can see that this function now has also a maximization problem, because this is the maximum of those linear penalization functions. Since this is a maximization over mu, in here, I can also move this maximization outside, because f doesn't depend on mu. So with respect to mu, f of x is a constant. So this is the same as saying I'm minimizing over x the maximum over mu of this function. That is a function of x and mu, with the only constraint being that mu is positive. So this new function in here, that is a function of x and mu, is what is called the Lagrangian function. So you can see it's some relaxation of my original objective function. Okay, so I'm now have this min-max problem. That's still not easy to solve, right? Or to derive optimality condition on this. So one way to see this min-max problem is kind of like a two-person game, right? I have the player x that can decide the variable x, and the player u that can decide the variable mu. So on one hand, x is trying to minimize this function for x, and on the other hand, I have mu, or u, that's trying to maximize this function for mu. But in this formulation, it's important to think of who is playing first and second, right, in this game. So here, first, the x player is trying to minimize this objective function for its decision variables, and then the u player reacts and then maximizing it for the given value of x that has been chosen. So you could say that this u player, by going second, has some kind of advantage, because they see what x is picked, and then they pick the worst possible mu that would maximize this function. So what would happen if I just switched the order, right? This is, we just said, the Lagrangian function, right? So what happens if I just switch the order of those two players? So instead of having this min-max problem, I have this max-min problem. So here first, the u player tries to maximize the function by picking a mu, and then based on this, the x player minimizes the function and picks an x that minimizes the function for this given mu. Well, it turns out it's a much simpler problem to solve, right? Because this function, right, for a given mu that's positive, this is convex. So for x, this is an unconstrained convex problem to solve for any value of mu. And this function, then this reaction of x, is actually a concave function. So for the mu player, they're also solving a convex problem. So it is much easier to solve, but it is not the original problem that we were trying to solve, right? This is what you would call the dual of the original problem we were trying to solve. So if I derive complementarity conditions or optimality condition on this problem, then that doesn't tell me that I have optimality for the primal problem. That only tells me this if I have this assumption that I have a zero duality gap. So under certain conditions, if strong duality holds, that tells me that the optimal solution of the dual problem are equal to the optimal solution of the primal problem. So in general, weak duality is always true. So there would be an inequality here, where the dual is always lower than the primal. But for convex problems that satisfy a set of conditions that we're not going to go into detail on, then strong duality also holds. For most of the problems we're going to solve, if we solve, some quadratic problem, linear problems, this strong duality holds. And that's very convenient, because that means now I only have to worry about deriving optimality condition on this dual Lagrangian problem. And this is something that's easier to do than deriving optimality condition on my original problem. So we've simplified a little bit what we need to do. So now what are those optimality conditions on this dual Lagrangian problem? So the first thing we can see is that for a given mu, right, the x problem is an unconstrained and convex problem. So at optimality for a given mu, then the optimal x should satisfy the first order conditions. So the gradient with respect to x of this function should be equal to 0, right? Yeah. Okay, so that is the first condition that we can derive. So if x is optimal, then it means the gradient of the Lagrangian with respect to x at optimality is equal to 0. So this is a necessary condition. Is it also a sufficient condition? Does it mean that if this gradient is equal to 0, then I know for sure that x and mu are optimal solutions? No. I added, a video. I think maybe we can watch it. It's just 2 minutes of what actually this condition means, what's its geometric interpretation, just to have some break from me talking about equations. And
there is a nice geometric intuition behind this condition. And let's see a visual explanation of what is happening here. And for simplicity, let's consider a case where we have only one inequality, just like the example we saw before, in which case this condition is saying that grad f and grad g are inversely proportional to each other. Let us delimit the feasible region given by G with a green line and consider an arbitrary point x inside this region. At this point x, let's draw the gradient of G and the gradient of f. And remember what gradients represent. When you follow the opposite direction to the gradient of a function, the value of that function will decrease, at least locally. So we know that in this green rectangle, the value of G will remain smaller than 0, and therefore, we can safely move x inside of this region without fear of violating the constraint. Similarly, if you nudge x to fall in the yellow region, you will reduce and hence improve the objective function f. So, if the yellow and green region intersect, it means that you can nudge your x a bit, stay feasible, and improve the objective value. So, such an x cannot be optimal. Said differently, if x were optimal, then necessarily the two regions should not intersect, which can only happen if the gradient of f and g are inversely proportional to each other.
So that's like just an intuitive representation of what this means, right? So we said this is a necessary condition, right? So that means you can't have an x that's optimal if this is not satisfied. But it's not enough to say that in the other way, if this is satisfied, then x is an optimal solution of your original problem. But if you add a few conditions, actually, you can have sufficient conditions. So those additional conditions, there's a few. The first one is that, well, x has to be feasible. That's pretty obvious, right? I mean, otherwise it's not an optimal solution of your original problem. Mu has to be feasible, so it means mu is positive, right? And another condition that is something new, which is this complementarity slackness. So this orthogonal sign means that the product of mu and g, right, is equal to 0. So either g is equal to 0, means that this constraint g is binding, or mu is equal to 0. So what does it mean to have this complementarity slackness, right? That's basically what it's trying to say is that, yeah, when you have your optimal solution, then these constraints don't, this penalization don't impact the optimal solution. So if you're in a case where at the optimal solution, a specific constraint is not binding, then this means that mu will be equal to 0, so you are not impacting this objective function because mu is equal to 0 in the Lagrangian function. Similarly, if you have a binding constraint, it means that you cannot improve your objective along this constraint, this complementarity condition. In this case, this Lagrangian dual variable, right, Lagrangian multiplier that's associated with each constraint, it represents the sensitivity of the original optimization problem with respect to this constraint. So when it's equal to 0, means the constraint is not binding at optimality. So this constraint doesn't impact the objective solution, the optimal solution. When this mu is positive, then that shows how much you could improve your solution if you removed this constraint at optimality, because it's a binding constraint at optimality. So this is the interpretation of this complementarity slackness condition. So to recap, now we're done with deriving equations. So we were trying to derive, right, some sufficient and necessary condition for the optimality of this constrained optimization problem. And these constraints that we've just derived, so the first order condition, complementarity slackness, and primal and dual feasibility, are sufficient and necessary optimality condition if you have a convex problem that satisfies strong duality. So we're going to stick to those problems for the rest of the talk. So I said we can generalize this also for problems that also have equality constraints. So what? Okay. Yeah. Great. This went really far. There. Okay. So if you have also equality constraints, an equality constraint is just two inequality constraints. So you could generalize this pretty easily, and you would arrive to these conditions, which are called also the KKT conditions. So you would have new Lagrange multipliers that are associated with the equality constraints, and those would be free, so they would not be just positive, they could also be negative. And you would have this new term to your Lagrangian. So this is how you would enhance those KKT conditions, which are the optimality conditions for any convex problem with strong duality holding. So this means, to answer our original question, if I give you these solutions for the market clearing problem, and you verify that they satisfy those KKT conditions, then you can tell me for sure, yes, those are optimal solutions. The optimal solution or an optimal solution, depending on whether or not those are unique. So now I'm scared of this thing. Okay. So then let's just go back to our original problem, right? I could derive the KKT conditions of this optimization problem, right? If I just introduce the Lagrange multiplier for each equality and inequality constraints in the problem, what you notice is that the Lagrange multiplier associated with the balance equation is what will give you the uniform price, because it represents the sensitivity of this constraint, right? So if I slightly increase my production or consumption, what is this marginal cost that is incurred? And that is what we use as the uniform price in the electricity market, right? So we can take a break now. what I can do is I can give you 5 minutes to try to derive those KKT conditions without me giving them to you. All right, so we've passed the parts where we're deriving the most equations. From now on, it's going to be some simple examples and applications of what we've seen, right? So I had some questions about the KKT conditions during the break. I hope, I don't know if it's clear for everybody else or if you have some additional questions. Okay, so, I mean, we can move on. If something isn't clear for now, just like accept that if you derive those KKT conditions, you have this optimality condition on any optimization problem that's convex and that has zero duality gap. So if we go back then to our original market clearing problem, hopefully you tried it as well. Don't want to go too much in detail through it. We could derive them one by one together. But I'd rather keep some time to do more applications of this afterwards. So yeah, you can derive the KKT conditions of this problem, and that would give you some guarantees on the optimal solutions. So one thing we discussed earlier is, so those two constraints here are the first order conditions. So the derivative of the Lagrangian with respect to the dispatch of the generators and then of the loads. So one thing you can see, right, is that here when you have so those dual variable mu underline and overline are associated with the upper and lower bounds on the dispatch of the generators or the consumers. So when you have a consumer or generator that is partially dispatched, right? So here we had a consumer whose load was between zero, that was partially covered, right? The second generator. Then its upper and lower bound constraints are not binding, right? This means that those dual variables would be equal to 0, and you would see in this equality constraint then some that the prices would take the value then of one of those bits, right? So that would be like the marginal generator or consumer that would be setting the price in the market. So that's how you could see that from those conditions. Okay, but let's move on. So we can derive this optimality condition, that's good. But I promised you that we would look at multiple agents making decisions simultaneously or sequentially, and so far we just looked at one market operator solving a pretty simple optimization problem. So now that I've solved this, okay, this market clearing problem, and I have my optimal solution, I have another question. So I know those are optimal solution of the market clearing problem based on the bits that I received, but if I'm the market operator, what I want to make sure of is that those market outcomes, the market participants, so the generators and the loads, are satisfied with those market outcomes and wouldn't want to deviate from it, right? So earlier somebody asked me, but why, like, wouldn't generator 2 that wasn't dispatched at all, why wouldn't they want to be dispatched instead of not producing anything? So can we actually prove that the market participants are actually satisfied from this market outcome, right? So I gave you some explanation with just like, you know, with my hands, but this is something actually that we could try to prove, right? So to prove that, the idea is then let's look at actually the optimization problem of each one of those market participants, right? So assuming they are rational market participants and they are self-interested, then they each have an internal optimization problem. They want to maximize their own profit or their surplus from the electricity they're consuming. So we can model those optimization problems, right? So on one side, we had the producers. So for each producer, each producer, you could formulate their optimization problem, which is they want to maximize their profit. So revenues they make on the market minus their production cost. And they're subject to some constraint on how much the minimum and maximum they can produce, right? So this, I could formulate this, right? Once the market is cleared, their profit is, so how much they receive, so that's the electricity price times their production, minus their cost time the production, right? So that is their profit. They're trying to maximize this. And constraints, fairly simple constraints, still minimum and maximum production. I could do very similar thing for all the consumers in the market. So for them, they want to maximize their surplus, which is the utility they derive from the energy minus how much they have to pay for that energy. And subject, again, to just minimum, maximum. So this surplus you could formulate as, so the utility they derive, which is their willingness to pay, right, minus how much they pay for each unit of electricity. So those are fairly symmetrical optimization problems, right? And they have some constraints on their consumption. Okay, good. So I could model this. What is actually this value here? I put lambda, right, as the market clearing price, right? So in this case, right, does each market participant, is that something they decide themselves, right, in this optimization problem? Should that be actually like a decision variable for them?
The price is given.
Yeah. Okay, so that is true if we make the assumption, right, that their behavior in the market does not impact the electricity prices, right? That's what's called, that's what's called perfect competition in the market. So if that is the case, right, then the producers and the consumers' participation in the market individually, right, does not impact the electricity price. So in this case, that would mean that this, this price in their optimization problem, each one of them, they consider it as a fixed parameter, right? So that's exogenous from their problem. But it is the same parameter, right, that we're talking about. So in each one of those optimization problems, this is the same market clearing price, right? So this means that those optimization problems still somehow are linked with each other because they need to take the same market clearing price. And this market clearing price we saw, it comes from the balance equation, right? So this means that we can't just solve those optimization problems separately. We need to also ensure that the balance equation is satisfied and that,
Making the assumption that lambda is fixed for all the producer and all the consumer is quite false for the guy that is clear. So
it's an assumption, totally. So especially in this small problem, right? You can very easily see that that is not true for generator 1. If they change their bids, they change the market's price. If you have, so this assumption of perfect competition is never fully true, just to be clear. Right?
Is that maximizing, for example, the production given a cost? In fact, it's a bit a strange problem because the idea of the producer or the consumer is to, in fact, decide what price they will bid, not really the production that they want.
That is true if the price that they bid can impact the electricity market outcomes, right? So if we assume that that's not the case, that there's perfect competition, then really what they want to know is for a given market price, how much do I want to produce, right? Do I want to produce or not? If you start looking at how what price they want to offer, then you're assuming they're being strategic and they think they can change the market price, which we are going to look at after. So the perfectly valid point. Yeah.
So from the producer slash the consumer side, for each of them, we've looked at two different optimizations. One, how much they bid, which was the previous lines, and then now we're just talking about how much they're bidding, but not in a financial way, but in the producing, in the power consumption way. Yeah.
Yes. So if there is perfect competition, right? So in this case, their problem is really not to try to bid by changing the price that they offer, but for a given market price, how much they would like to produce, right? So it's so compared to the market clearing problem. So the market clearing problem earlier was from the perspective of the market operator. So given the bids, so the cost and the quantity that was offered, like what would be maximizing the social welfare. And if you assume that they haven't been strategic in how they've placed those bids, right, then it's really the same problem, but seen from the perspective of the consumers. Instead of the market operator deciding how much should I dispatch of people to maximize the social welfare, it's each one of them saying, how much do I want to be dispatched to maximize my own interest, right? But yeah, again, this is under some pretty strong assumption, and it's never fully true. I guess you could say it's true asymptotically if you have an infinite amount of market participants, right? Then you don't have market power and you can't change the market outcomes by changing your bid. So it is an approximation, right? And we're going to see what kind of impact it has to make also this assumption. But so yeah, for now we have these problems from the consumer and producer's perspective that are not fully independent from each other, right? They are still linked by the fact that at optimality, the market outcome has to satisfy this balance equation. And this balance equation doesn't depend just on their decision, but also the decision of the others, right? And that is where the lambda, so the uniform price also comes from. So this means actually the system is linked. So I can't solve each optimization problem independently, right? I need to solve them simultaneously. So now I have a system of multiple optimization problem, and to find actually its optimal solutions, I need to solve multiple optimization problems at the same time that are linked with each other. So this is an equilibrium problem. In this case, all of those consumers and producers are making the decision at the same time. So they're not observing what the other is deciding to produce. They're all deciding what to produce at the same time, and I want to see what is the equilibrium that arises from this system of linked optimization problems. So, is there a way that I can do that? Can I just, I can't put all of those optimization problems in Groby and ask it to find the solutions that are optimal for each producer and satisfy this extra condition that links them. So is there a way that I could use what I've learned today to solve these systems of optimization problems simultaneously? Yeah?
And you could maybe make a bi-level optimization problem and include the consumers and also its KPTs inside the problem.
Okay, so why bi-level?
You have two optimization problems, right? You have the both producers and consumers optimization have to both do.
Yeah. So that is on the right track, right? But if you do that, you're kind of so you have to define what's the upper level, what's the lower level. So somehow you're giving kind of an advantage or priority to whatever is in the upper level, right? They're making the decision knowing the decisions of the others. So that is not exactly what we're trying to solve here, right? Yeah.
iterative methods like primary development?
Yeah. Yes, you could decompose this, right, and solve it iteratively using some, yeah.
Just gather all the KKTs together.
Thank you. Somebody remembered the theme of the class. Yeah. So decomposition is definitely a method. If you wanted to solve it in one go, right, what you could do is just write conditions on what it means to be optimal for each one of those optimization problems, right? So if instead of solving each one of those optimization problem, I replace them by their KKT condition respectively, right? So if I derived the KKT condition of each prosumer's problem, of each consumer's problem, and then added the linking constraint between those systems of KKT conditions, right? Then now I have a system of conditions that tell me that the solution I'm getting is optimal for the producers and it's optimal for the consumers, and also it satisfies the balance equation. Yes?
High-level formulation?
A little bit, except that here you just have one level. Okay, no, that's not.
The lower level is like each optimality for each user, and the upper level is just a feasibility problem, right?
So, I guess, yeah, I mean, yes, typically in a bi-level, right, the upper level would also be an optimization problem, not just a feasibility condition, right? So, yeah, I guess in a sense, if you didn't have an objective necessarily in the upper level, yeah. Yeah, I guess that's a way to see it, yeah, that makes sense. All right, so this system of equations, right, if I find solutions to it, I can guarantee that my solution is optimal for the producer, the consumer, and satisfies my balance equation. Now, earlier, that means that if I find solutions for this, I know it's a solution that satisfies everybody, right? Because it's maximizing the producer and the consumer's own objective. Now, the trick is, and the really good thing is, if actually I compare this system of equations to the KKT condition of my market clearing problem, what happens? It's a miracle, but those are exactly the same conditions. So that tells me that the optimal solutions of my market clearing problem are the same as the optimal solution that satisfy each one of the self-interested market participants. This is under the assumption that they are not strategic, they are price takers. They do not impact the prices individually and strategically on the market, right? So in this case, that tells me that the outcomes of my market clearing are satisfying all of my producers and consumers. So the solution we saw earlier, no, the producer 2 would not rather be dispatched. I can prove that, right? They would not rather be dispatched because that would not satisfy those KKT conditions. So this would not be optimal for them. So just to summarize, right, what we've showed is that under perfect competition, the KKT conditions of this single optimization problem is the same as the KKT condition of the equilibrium problem, where each consumer is self-interested and dispatching themselves. This means that the social welfare in the market is maximized when each one of the market participants also maximizes their own profit and or surplus, right? And both of those solutions represent a Nash equilibrium, which means that none of the market participants would like to deviate from this, right? Because they're maximizing their own profit. So this is a property that we would call efficiency of the market, which is a very desirable property. So of course, we only achieve that under the assumption of perfect competition. This idea also that you maximize social welfare when everybody acts in a selfish way is basically what you could call the invisible hand of the market, right? But free market, everybody is selfish, is beneficial for society. So we've proved it. It's great. Under a very strong assumption that nobody can be strategic and have market power, which is, again, very strong assumption. So this is, yeah.
Wondering how to use this in practice, because you really don't have access to the optimization problems that these consumers and generators are solving for you to derive the KKTs, right?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, when we're assuming that they have, like, it's perfect competition, then basically their cost and maximum capacity is the same as what they submitted in the market, right? But it's true that if you're trying to observe their competitive behavior and model this using this technique, then you would need to know their true parameters that they might not have submitted to the markets, right? So you would need to know what is the actual marginal cost, maximum capacity, all their constraints to actually represent their own objective. So yeah, this is sensitive information that you can't necessarily have, right? So yeah, this can be tricky. We're going to see another example of strategic behavior, but from the perspective of one firm. So if you're that firm that's being strategic, then you would know your own preferences. So you could then solve it only from your perspective. So yeah, we have a very good property of this market, and this is partially also why you would have this type of market design that could be interesting. Yeah.
Competition.
Yeah, let's move on to imperfect competition. And so. Okay, how long? Okay, before we move on to imperfect competition, like just to give you also some overview. So this efficiency is a very desirable property for the market, but there are other desirable properties that you could want when you design a market. The first one, there's typically 4 desirable market properties typically, right? The first one would be revenue adequacy. So it means that if you're the market operator, you do not incur some financial losses. So whatever the consumers pay is more than what is paid to the producers. In this case of this economic dispatch, when you have a uniform price, it's easy to see directly from the balance equation that those would be equal, right? So there's budget balance. Whatever's paid by the consumer is distributed to the producers. If you have OPFs and then some congestions on the lines and the prices on each side differ, then you might not have budget balance, but you might have some congestion rent. This can be typically, so that results from the difference of marginal prices at each node, and there's some papers of how you could also redistribute this rent for the system operators. So this is a good property for the market operator, obviously, don't want to lose money. Another one is from the perspective of the consumers and the producers, cost recovery, so you don't want to lose money when you participate in the market. So if I'm dispatched, if I'm a producer and I'm dispatched, I don't want to be paid less than my cost, right? So if I bid a cost and then I'm dispatched at a market price that is lower than this, then I would lose money. So you don't want that. That would not be rational for you to participate in this market. So again, if you look at the KKT conditions of these optimization problems, you can actually see that there is cost recovery for the participants, at least for the cost that they submit to the market. It doesn't mean they would necessarily recover their capital cost, right? So this is a good property. And that pretty much stops here for the properties that we achieve with this market. So Incentive compatibility is another important property that we kind of touched on when we said, what if they bid something different? Incentive compatibility means that the optimal strategy for a market participant is to bid their true preferences, so their true cost and their true quantity, right? So they cannot benefit from being strategic. They have to be truthful. That's the best strategy. So we kind of assumed that that was the case when we said there's perfect competition, so they can't influence the prices by being strategic. But that is not true in general, unfortunately. So if you look at this case, right, that we had, producer one here, they could just increase their prices to increase the market prices and make more profit. So this in general, right, incentive compatibility is not fully satisfied by the market. And then the fourth property, which is what we saw earlier, right, market efficiency. Yeah.
Imperfect competition, because otherwise, if you have enough, several participants, with the players clear, everyone is incentivized to bid at the lowest cost, operational cost. So incentive compatibility is quite nice with the players clear. Not with the players bid, I agree, but in the players clear, it's quite good now.
So it's never fully true, though, right? If you're the marginal producer, there's always somebody at some point on the market that has some market power, right?
It's a really question, but if you have already a lot of producers and consumers, you do not know exactly if you will be cleared or not. And so, I mean, yes, of course, the highest participant has power, but he does not know he will be the cleared one.
They can't fully exploit this all the time, right? But like if you have congestion or it's certain hours where you have, higher loads, for example, right? You could be strategic. Let's say you're natural gas producers in like a period of peak, you are going to set the prices, so you could be strategic, right? Technically. So of course, like it's not as easy as this example. But unless you have basically an infinite amount of participants or a very large amount, then you don't have full incentive compatibility. But the more participants you have, then of course the less you can profit from this strategic behavior. So that's that's why I guess it doesn't completely go bananas in the market, thankfully. And then market efficiency also falls apart kind of if you don't have, incentive compatibility and if participants can be strategic, because if they start being strategic, then the social welfare is decreased in the market, right? So that also falls apart in general, right? Of course, under some conditions, you can have more or less efficiency losses, and if you have perfect competition, then asymptotically, you could have a perfectly efficient market. So this doesn't look too good for our electricity market, but actually the good or bad news is that there is no market that can achieve all of those properties at the same time, right? At least not perfectly. So there's some theoretical results about this. So doesn't mean this market is bad. It achieves some of those properties, it's always a trade-off then between different market designs, which of these properties you might or might not achieve.
Based in this theory, the quantification of the system, if it's not really true since 1970.
What it tells you is...
Maybe that's what we can do or something like that?
Yes, I guess it depends, like what properties you would think are more important, and also not satisfying one property doesn't mean that, you might be close also to satisfying it under the conditions of the market, right? So for incentive compatibility or efficiency, the more participants you have, then the more efficient your market will be. So then you can have also some strategies and try to diversify and deregulate, so there's more and more participants and more competition, right? If you had this market with a duopoly, right, that would be really bad, right? But
the market is rise and there are a lot of actors. We try to simulate like a perfect market, like the most perfect possible.
yeah, so that could be, this equilibrium could be a way also to model like what would be an ideal, right, if the market was completely efficient, but then also you can simulate more realistically how the market behaves, and you can see how much of efficiency you're losing in practice, right? Yeah, so it doesn't mean it's terrible. But there's been other proposals for different markets, right? Different ways of pricing. So pay as bid, also some VCG type of markets. So VCG is great because it's incentive compatible, right? But you don't have necessarily budget balance or revenue adequacy. So that's a big minus for this mechanism that makes it quite impractical, right? So, but yeah, mechanism design is an interesting topic if that's something you guys are interested in looking into. Yep. As you said also earlier, like it's hard to also exploit the fact that you can be strategic, right? So especially depending on the market, even if you don't have theoretically incentive compatibility, it doesn't mean that everybody can exploit it fully, right? So seeing also, depending on how hard it is to exploit it, you could also have some empirical kind of results that show that, people can't exploit it too much because of the conditions in the market. Right. So we said actually,
I think one more property that might not be satisfied the revenue adequacy, because then we have capacity market because of revenue adequacy.
So revenue adequacy is, I guess, from the perspective of the market operator, right? It means that in the specific market, what the producers receive, the money, right, that they get paid, is less than what the consumers pay, right? So there's, adequacy in the system, I guess. System adequacy is I guess, a slightly different issue where capacity markets, do help. But I guess in this sense, it's just monetary. That's the producers will pay some amount for the electricity they consume, and that has to be greater than what is paid to the producers. That's not true with VCG though. So there has to be some kind of modifications to it for it to be true. And maybe also like, in terms of cost recovery, right? This is only related to the operational costs, right? Compared to what you bid in the market, your variable costs. That is what you recover. It doesn't mean you recover your capital costs necessarily.
For this, I saw a work from Marcel Boiteux, an engineer from France, that showed that paying at the marginal cost of your electrical production assets is equal to recover the OPEX and the CAPEX. But this is true that it does not hold true in all the cases if you have some noise on this marginal price. But normally, if you use these techniques of marginal price, you can recover both CAPEX and OPEX.
So in practice, because there's going to be some hours where you are paid at the marginal price of somebody more expensive than you, right? So you have different, I guess, business model for depending on what type of producer you are, right? If you are a peak generator that's very expensive, that might be dispatched, I don't know, twice during the year, then then your your capex, then you recover only in those few hours, right? And so it also depends on like how often you're dispatched, but I guess that's not necessarily a theoretical a guarantee or?
The theoretical economical work in the early 60s, something like this. So I don't know if everything holds true. It's more a question than something else. But yes, I think it's possible to recover the capex.
It is. I mean, it's possible. Otherwise, nobody would still be alive and building power plants. Right? So, in practice, yes. I mean, they do recover, but yeah, I have to look, I guess, at the paper. Like, if they maybe in the long term also, like because yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's just always optimal level of hours at the value of lost load or the price cap, depending on what the price cap is, in order to ensure that the peak producers or peak generators are recovering their capital costs. But this is just theoretical, so we can derive the optimal level of capacity of base load of peak generators, but there is no assurance that it will happen when the market actually operates. So there is optimal level, but when the market operates, it's a bit different.
But yeah, I'd love to see the work. Yeah, we can talk about it after. Okay, so. All right, so we've seen that there is some room, right, for people to be strategic, actually. That's, I guess, the conclusion. So then the next part, I guess, of this lecture is trying to model, using this complementarity modeling, actually the strategic behavior of people who are playing in those markets, right? So maybe we can take a break after that. Okay, so yeah. So how can we model, right, the strategies of those market participants who want to increase their profit? So we're going to consider one specific case, right? So where we have a generator that can be strategically to change the electricity market prices in a way that benefits them. So we're going to look at a generator that's only strategic in the quantity they offer, right? Of course, they can be strategic also in the price that they offer. But in this example, we're going to look at what if they are strategic in the quantity that they offer in the market. Could they increase their profit, right? So if you create some shortage, right, basically that is the idea. I create some shortage in the market, then I can increase the prices, right? So if we look at this very simple example we had, right? If you look at generator G1, how could they, by changing the quantity that they offer in the market, they don't offer their full capacity, how could they improve their profit? Right now, their profit is 0, right? Because they're the marginal generator. So they're paid at 15 euros, and their production cost is 15 euros. So anybody who has an idea what they would do, yeah?
Quantity, yes. After that, they change the curve, the rating curve, so the last band will be 0, so as that they can receive the intermarginal revenue.
Yeah, but if they reduce that, then they won't sell as much, right?
You need to like a corner equilibrium in order to improve your strategy.
Yeah, exactly. So if I'm G1, what I could do, I reduce the quantity I offer so that G2 now is dispatched and is the one setting the price, right, at 30 euro per megawatt hour. This means I'm also going to be paid at 30 euro per megawatt hour. So instead of selling 125, let's say I offer only 90 megawatt hour, and I only sell 90. But of those 90, I make a profit of 15 per megawatt hour. So now I have a higher profit than what I had earlier by selling my entire capacity. So this is a strategy where you can also impact the market prices by changing not the price that you offer, but the quantity that you offer. So of course they're able to do this because they know the other participants in the market, right? So they know who would become marginal producer and when that would happen, right? So if we assume that they do have this information, that they can model how their action of changing their quantity is going to impact the market clearing, right? Then we can model this strategy, this optimal strategy, right? Do you see any resemblance between this and the poker game that you played earlier? So,
Like now that you know the alternative or what he could have played, you change your strategy, obviously. So after I found out, I would have been better playing like no cards or one card instead of two.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that is because this is a sequential game, right? First, you play, right? You pick how many cards you wanted, or you decide the quantity you're offering, and then that impacts what happens in the market in this case, or what happens with the deck of cards that your competitors could pick, right? So it's a sequential one, and then you're the one making the first move, right? And your move will impact the reaction of the second player. Yeah.
Impacts you're the first player or the second player.
In this case,
I mean, if you can impact the strategy of the other person in the poker game, if you pick the, I don't know, the aces or the cards, do you mean that as you know the player game, so you can know that the possibilities for other player game it will be less with this kind of way. So that means there is some impact if you are the first player or second player when you do a bid in the market too.
So, okay. So in the market, right, everybody bids at the same time, right? So in this case, the second player isn't another market participant. In this case, the second player would be just the market clearing, right? So we're going to see if we're making the assumption that we're the only ones being strategic, right? So what you're modeling is how your strategy then will impact the market clearing, which is an optimization problem. So you could see this market clearing as the second player that would react to your bid, right? But since other market participants are bidding at the same time, they're not observing your bid, right? So you're not directly impacting what the others are bidding. So if we assume that the others are not strategic, right, and they're bidding their true cost, or we know what cost they're bidding, then we could model this as a sequential game. So this is a classic type of game that's called a stackable game. So it's a sequential game where you have two players. The first one to play to make the move is the leader. They make their action, and they know that their action is going to impact the reaction of the second player, which is the follower. But also that the reaction, the best response of this follower will then impact, their objective and how much money, or their objective function of the leader. So you have this kind of sequential game where the actions and reactions of each player impacts the other. So in this case, for the leader, if they know the best reaction of the follower, right, then they can try to anticipate it. Of course, if they have no idea, then they can't anticipate it. And like in the poker game, you're just trying to maximize your expected profits. So let's see how this relates then, how we could model our strategic bidder in this way in the market. So we said we're the only strategic bidder, so what we're looking at is how a bid is going to impact the market clearing. So then we're considering the market clearing as the follower, that we're trying to win against, right? We're trying to manipulate how this market clearing is going to react. So our objective, if I'm producer G1, is to maximize my profit again, right? Revenues minus cost, and subject to constraints on the maximum production that I can offer, and also subject to constraints that anticipate the optimality and the market clearing, right? So what are my decision variables, right? What am I trying to optimize? We said we're trying to optimize the quantity. So in this case, I'm not optimizing as earlier the dispatch itself. I'm optimizing how much I bid, how much I offer on the market. So, right. So my decision variable is this quantity that I bid in the market, right? It's not how much is dispatched in the market. That is still decided by the market. So my profit is the same function, except that in this case, the outcomes of the market, which are the price and the dispatch, I am going to model this endogenously, not as parameters. So I have a constraint on how much I can offer, right? Obviously, I can only offer as much as, I can only offer, so I'm going to be, this constraint is wrong. Sorry. This is not what you should say. It should be a bound on the bid that you offer. So this overline P should be actually lower than your true capacity, right? So what you're deciding is how much you offer, and it should be between 0 and your maximum capacity to be feasible. And then your second constraint is an optimality condition on the market outcomes, right? So what you're saying is that the electricity prices and how much you are dispatched are the solutions of the market clearing problem. So this is the formulation of the market clearing problem we've seen earlier. It's exactly the same one, except that you observe that here, the bid of producer 1 is constrained by how much they decided to offer, right? So this, my bid, is going to impact the constraints of the market clearing problem. And in return, the outcomes of the market clearing problem, so my dispatch and my price, are going to be the solutions of this market clearing problem. So here I have actually a bi-level problem, right? Which means that in the upper level, I'm trying to optimize my strategy while I have conditions on the optimality of the lower level. So this way, these are endogenously modeled as variables also in the lower level. And the way we would solve it is very similar to the way we solved the equilibrium problem, right? Instead of having to solve this optimization problem, since we've seen these very nice KKT conditions, we can actually replace this optimization problem by its KKT conditions. And now we would have one optimization problem that has some constraints that are KKT conditions. So some of the constraints of my optimization problem are optimality conditions. This resulting problem would be called a mathematical problem with equilibrium constraints. So these KKT conditions, these lower level constraints, are what you would call equilibrium constraints. So in this case, I have only one lower level, right? Because I'm only anticipating the reaction of one follower. But in a general case, you could be anticipating the reaction of multiple followers, right? So then, instead of having one set of KKT conditions in your optimization problem, you would have one set of KKT condition per optimization problem. So you would have actually an equilibrium here as constraints of your optimization problem. So this becomes an optimization problem that you can solve, right? You have an objective, some constraints. Some of these constraints, specifically the complementarity one, are not convex, right? Because you have a product of variables equal to 0. But what you could do is solve this using a disjunctive approach. So you introduce this big M parameter and some binary variables saying either mu is equal to 0 or this constraint is equal to 0. So you could basically reformulate this as a mixed integer linear problem, which we can solve using most solvers more and more efficiently. Of course, if you have a lot of complementarity conditions, that becomes a bigger and bigger problem that is computationally not tractable if you have too many constraints, but we still have pretty good solvers now that can solve this. So, so yeah, by doing this, I can optimize the strategy of my producer, G1, and I can actually find the optimal quantity that they should offer, right, to maximize their profit. So here, they would want to go to like produce as much as possible while leaving G2 being the marginal producer. So you could try to solve this, and you can see that compared to the original solution of the market clearing problem where nobody was strategic, now I've increased the producer's profit and reduced the consumer's surplus, and overall the social welfare compared to the first solution with perfect competition is decreased, right? So this is not fully efficient market because the producer in this case can benefit by being strategic and reduce the social welfare when they do this. Yeah, so this is one way that you could use this complementarity modeling to model the strategy of some players when you have sequential games. This way they can anticipate the way their action will impact the reaction of the second player. So I think there's a short discussion before taking a break. So do you see any limitations, I guess, to apply this method in practice, right? That was a very, it's a toy example that I showed you with those two producers. And yeah.
A limitation is you need full information from all the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And depending who those stakeholders are, that's quite difficult to obtain, right? So is there any way you could, yeah?
Wait, amazing. I was just going to comment on the next limitation.
Yeah.
I think it's not very scalable.
Yeah, I mean, depending, here we just have one set of KKT conditions because we have one follower. But if you had many followers, then you'd have a lot of KKT conditions, which you could linearize, but that would be a very large mixed integer linear problem. So, I mean, we solve large mixed integer linear problems, and we solve large unit commitment problems, but yeah, it is not very, it's not the most scalable problem. Yeah.
I think the second problem is the objective function.
Yes. Okay, so I didn't want to go through too much to this. In this case, yeah, no. I don't want to move forward, I want to move back. Yeah, so it is nonlinear, right? You have this lambda times p. Actually, this is something, in this case, that you can linearize exactly. By taking, if you look at strong duality of the lower level and the KKT conditions, then you can exactly linearize this. So yeah, it's just a few transformation based on the KKT conditions. But in this case, the objective function is not so much an issue. It's more the complementarity conditions that make it non-convex. Just to come back to your point also about perfect information, right? Do you have any idea how you could solve this? I mean, if you did not have this perfect information on the followers, could you still do something a little bit better than not anticipating at all? Yeah.
To really model all the consumers, but you can replace them, for example, with a function.
Yeah, you could have some approximation of the consumers, yeah. Yes, you could also have some, I mean, we solve optimization problems where we don't know fully the input parameters all the time, so you could also have some scenarios or, yeah, some decision-making under uncertainty techniques where you're uncertain about the response of the followers, so you would try to find an expectation, a strategy that is good in expectation. Yeah. Okay, and then just for you to discuss for, what time is it? 12:20. Maybe you can take 5 minutes to discuss the second question together. Like, based on this, do you see any applications that you could implement for your research, right? In your work, and there's some other problems that you could solve using those complementarity modeling techniques. And then I'll give you like how I've used it in my research. Some people came to tell me what some ideas they had to implement it. So, no, okay. I think they went for a break, so maybe I'll have to relay. But so one idea that I heard is if you are doing some capacity expansion, right? If you're a system operator, so transmission expansion, and your goal is to maximize the social welfare, right? Then the social welfare will result from the market outcomes, right? So you could have a bi-level optimization problem where the leader is decided how much to invest in the network, and then the follower would be then the market participants and the market clearing, which would tell you then the social welfare under this investment. So you could get, the social welfare as a lower level, the solution of the lower level problem being the market clearing. Somebody else has any problem that could be modeled using these tools? Yeah.
Complementarity modeling could also be used for kind of finding optimal policy, so that the players in the, for instance, electricity market, carbon market, so that they react in the way that policymakers actually would like them to react.
Yes.
And hopefully make bad policies where they're.
Yes, that's a very good point, and I like those two examples because it shows also it's not necessarily just to make profit, right? If you model the leader as a policymaker or a system operator, the objective could be, to find something that is social welfare maximizing. They just need to model the reaction of self-interested agents. So that's also a very good example. Another one that could come to mind. It could be also in the case where you have kind of adversarial problems, right? So if you have some cyber attacks or any attacker, then which have some limitations or some strategy, then you could also take some preemptive action or some recovery actions that will also anticipate how you would how the attacker would respond, right? And the other way around, I guess the attacker could also have the same strategy, anticipate how the system would try to recover to inflict as much damage as possible with some limited budget or actions. So any kind of also adversarial game, yeah.
Thinking of like if you're in the same situation, you're in like it's one after another game, and then you can run this simulation to, like you said, forecast what your opponent is going to do. And now you can use that as an input to actually beat them to it. Or something like that.
Yes, exactly. So so there's a lot of problems that with some imagination you could model as this type of problem. I wanted to just conclude by trying to present some application of stuff I've used in my research using this complementarity modeling. During my PhD, I guess, I worked on sector coupling. So if you look at different sectors that include the electricity, the natural gas, the district heating networks, right? Those are all networks that are operated by different system operators or different market operators, right? So we don't have one optimization problem, one multi-carrier system operator that maximizes the social welfare in all those networks. But the dispatch in one of those networks might impact the dispatch in the other ones, right? Because you have natural gas power plants. You have also combined heat and power plants that can produce heat and electricity that have some constraints. You have heat pumps that consume electricity to produce heat. So those systems are linked, right? But currently there's no one system operator that optimizes them all. So you could model, I guess, the optimal strategies from one system operator perspective and ask them to anticipate the impact of their strategy on the rest of the system, right? So each one of the system operators is still trying to maximize the social welfare, at least in their system, right? So for the heat system, for example, or the electricity system. So I've worked on how to use complementarity modeling for this type of problems. One challenge was that if you're doing this, then you need one system operator to know also to have a lot of data and on the other systems, right? If I want to model how much my heat dispatch is going to impact the electricity system, then I need to know everything that's going to happen in the electricity system, which is a very strong assumption and might have also some sensitive data. So we also looked a little bit at what happens then if you can't have full access to this data. Could you, for example, make this data private in a way that then you can still exchange it between the leader and follower in a way that's safe? So one example, right, that I looked at a lot is the coordination between heat and electricity markets, right? So in Denmark and in some Nordic countries, you have actually a centralized kind of heat network that can span over multiple cities. So it's like an exchange of hot water that's produced by a few big combined heat and power plants, right? So you have a heat market that works pretty much like an electricity market, right? But it's cleared before the electricity market, typically, right? A few hours before. And once this heat market has been cleared, then the combined heat and power plants know how much heat they have to produce. After that, they can participate in the electricity market. And because they have some constraints, typically, combined heat and power plants, that limits how much electricity they can produce based on how much heat they're producing, right? So you have this kind of feasible operating region that then, once you've dispatched their heat production, that will constrain how much they can offer in the electricity market. So that could then create some inflexibility in the electricity market that could be detrimental, right? Let's say I force the combined heat and power plant to be on and to produce a lot of electricity when I have also a lot of wind, then I might end up curtailing some wind, right? So that's not, so doing a heat dispatch that's completely myopic to what the impact on the electricity market will be, could be detrimental and lower the social welfare overall, right? So we went from the assumption that having a combined heat and electricity dispatch was not possible. We looked at it as a benchmark, but it's not going to happen that you're going to have one system operator that dispatches all the heat and electricity across Denmark and the Nordics, right? So what we try to do is, can we improve this heat market so that it anticipates how it will impact the electricity market? Yeah, and in the other way, right, the heat dispatch impacts the electricity market, but the other way is also true, right? Once the electricity market is cleared, that will impact the social welfare on the heat side. And that is because of the marginal cost of those combined heat and power plants or those heat pumps, right? If the electricity price is very high, then it will be very expensive for my heat pumps to operate. So if I dispatch a lot of heat pumps, and then turns out the electricity prices are very high, then those heat pumps are going to operate at some loss, which I don't want, right? For combined heat and power plants, this marginal cost actually is a bit more complicated to compute. At the beginning, it represents, some kind of marginal production cost, but then there's also some opportunity loss, right? If I produce too much heat, and electricity prices are very high and I can't produce enough electricity, then I have an opportunity loss from the perspective of the CHP. So that would impact then the social welfare on the heat side if I don't dispatch the units like the CHPs and heat pumps that have the lowest marginal production cost. But I can't know that when I'm clearing the heat market, because that will depend on how the electricity market is cleared. So in one way, my heat dispatch impacts the electricity market, but then the electricity market also impacts the social welfare on my heat system. So that is, again, a classic Stackelberg game, right? And in this case, the heat system operator or market operator is the leader because they're making their decision first. That's just how it's done, right? So we didn't like change this assumption. They clear the market 2 hours before the electricity market. So that is, it's how it is, right? So yeah, we took this Stackelberg game and then we tried to model a new way to clear the heat market, right? So the classic way is completely decoupled, so it's myopic. The heat market is dispatched without accounting for its impact on the electricity market. So they just try to like forecast some electricity price, they plug that in, and then they clear the heat market. So there's no feedback loop here. An integrated way would be optimal, right? Where you'd have a heat and electricity market cleared together, but that's kind of infeasible. So that would be the best case, that would be the worst case. What we try to do is to have something in between where you have an electricity-aware heat market that is a bi-level problem. So you try to maximize the social welfare on the heat system, subject to complementarity conditions that represent the optimality of the electricity market. So this is the approach that we proposed. And of course, to do this, one challenge is that you need to know kind of a lot of parameters from the electricity side, from the electricity network, to be able to represent this. So the first thing we did was to assume perfect information, get some performance. Then we said, okay, we don't actually have perfect information, but maybe we have scenarios, so we can have like different scenarios of how the electricity market is going to be cleared, and then I maximize my expectation. So we did like some simulations, some examples, and what you observe is that this electricity-aware solution is better than the myopic one, right? Both for the heat and for the electricity sides, and for the combined system as a whole. So it's still not as good as, I guess, the integrated, the perfect solution, but you still have some significant gains, I guess. And that is depending also on the wind penetration. So there's different gains that you can have. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So what happens if the electricity prices are very, very high, right? Then the marginal production cost of some CHPs, well, at some point it could be negative, right? So they could have some negative production costs. So that's why you could have some heat cost that is negative in some cases. But it's because of the way this heat cost is calculated. It's kind of the total cost minus the electricity cost. So
make interpretation about that, or just like mathematical approximation or something?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to look at kind of like these these marginal production costs from the CHPs under different electricity prices value. So for low electricity price, what you want is for to produce, I guess, as much heat as possible, But then there is one point where you start, I guess, start increasing again because you're losing by producing too much heat over electricity. So I'll have to look exactly where. I don't remember exactly where. But you can see, yeah, there's some cases where it could be negative, this cost. Yeah.
We have like a market operator that tries to maximize social welfare, minimize the cost. Then where does this difference between the sequential clearing and the coupled clearing come from?
Yeah. So in this case, right, the heat market is not trying to maximize the social welfare of the whole system, but only of the heat side of the system, right? So it's not trying to maximize the social welfare of heat plus electricity. It's still only interested in its network as an objective, right? So that's why it could happen that this could be detrimental, that it's actually minimizing the social welfare on the heat side, but in a way that's detrimental to the electricity. But because of the type of interactions that they have, actually, I mean, you can see that it is not detrimental to the electricity side either, right? Because it's finding kind of it's finding a good compromise where you don't overcommit your CHPs so that it creates some wind curtailment, but you also don't under dispatch them because then the electricity prices would be high and you'd have an opportunity loss from them. So because of the structure of the problem, it doesn't happen that you're dispatching, you're optimizing the heat side over the electricity side. But the integrated one here is trying really to find the best social welfare for the total. So it could happen that I think in some cases, no, I don't have it here, but in some cases the integrated one then increases the heat system cost compared to the sequential myopic one, which wouldn't be really a good selling point if I go to a heat system operator and say, yeah, let's do this integrated one, but then you're going to lose money on the heat side and it's going to benefit only the electricity side. So it's a bit, bit tricky to justify. Yes, but then, I mean, you're talking to different actors that don't have the same objectives. Sure, they want to benefit society, but, I mean, they also have, investors and electricity and heat prices then to justify, and consumers, and they still don't fully align their objectives, right?
Couldn't you also include something like a feedback loop that's like not completely integrated, but I mean, it's another discussion how that would work in reality. But from an optimization standpoint, couldn't you include something like a feedback loop, so like solving sequentially first heat, then electricity, but then going to a feedback loop and then solving heat again with some adjustments?
Yeah, but then, so wouldn't you converge then to this bi-level problem where you replace with KKT conditions? Like, I mean, we've actually solved it by decomposing it also because it was quite intractable also for large systems.
Integrated one.
So the bi-level one, we ended up decomposing it to solve it instead of just reformulating the whole MPEC because it was quite heavy. So we use some Bender's decomposition. So basically you have a master problem that's trying to optimize the heat, and then you send to some sub-problem that optimizes the electricity, and then there's a loop, and then it iterates until it converges to this solution of this myopic one, not the integrated one. Because I guess the issue with the integrated one is not just that you don't have a system operator solving it, but also that the solution it yields might benefit one system, but then increase the costs significantly in the other one. And that would be, I guess, hard to explain or justify for the system that is not benefiting from it. So we solved this, using perfect information, using some kind of scenarios. Of course, if you have scenarios on the heat system, then that kind of gives you less good results because you can't fully, you don't know exactly how you impact the heat, the electricity system. So you lose in performance. So what we try to argue is that, okay, the electricity system operator has this data, right? The bids of all the market participants, etc. So it's not that this information doesn't exist. It's just that the heat system operator does not have it. So if you could get some way for the electricity system operator to communicate safely this information to the heat system operator, then we could show that that would benefit both of them, right? But of course, some of this data might be sensitive. They might not want to share all of these bids, in the market before it happens. So what we try to propose is then to add some privacy. So instead, for the follower, which is the electricity market, to communicate its private input data to the leader, it would first add a layer of privacy to it and then communicate it to the leader. So there is, then the leader would solve, again, this bi-level problem with this privatized data. And if this data is privatized in a smart way, right, then you would arrive at a very similar social welfare. So the issue that you get is that one common, so that would be the general flow, right? Follower shares data in a private way. The leader solves their problem with this data and then sends their decision, and then the follower solves their actual problem. The issue, traditionally, how you could do this, one very good, well-known framework is differential privacy. So the idea is that instead of sharing your true data, you add some noise to it, right? So you sample from some distribution, and then instead of sharing the true data, you share the noisy version. But depending on how you do this, right, the more noise you add, the more privacy you have. But if you don't do that in a very smart way, then that could create like solutions in the leader problem that are completely suboptimal, might even be actually like infeasible compared to the original problem. So what we try to do is to have kind of like a data sharing mechanism, private, that would be well suited for this Stackelberg games problem, in which the follower needs to send some sensitive information to the leader in a way that doesn't degrade too much the objective of the leader and the follower. So that is what we call this, privacy-preserving Stackelberg mechanism. That's just a way to add noise in this way. So I'm not going to go like also too much in detail, but like, that's the idea of differential privacy. You want to protect some data by adding some noise. So typically you have like a Lagrangian mechanism. So the goal is that if you have an attacker looking at the data after you added noise, then they couldn't tell the original ones apart if the original ones were close enough. So that's some level of indistinguishability. So the idea is you add some Laplace noise. The more noise you add, the more private you are, obviously. So we started with this phase of adding noise, but then we observed that the solutions of the leader and follower were terrible, right? It would be better just to be myopic and not do any of this. So it's not very good. So what we did is we tried to add another step, which is some post-processing step, because one interesting differential privacy property is that it's immune to post-processing. So whatever you do after you've added this noise, right, won't reduce the privacy of the data. So the idea is just to redistribute the noise that we've added to the sensitive data And we do this in a way that will then minimize the deviation in the solutions of the leader and follower. So we have this fidelity recovery phase. And actually, in itself, it is a bilevel problem, because you're trying to find the optimal way to redistribute some noise that will minimize, basically, the deviations from the true optimal solution. So again, that's another way, I guess, to use complementarity and bilevel optimization. Yeah, we try to minimize the loss of optimality for the leader and the follower. And that is ensured through a bilevel problem, and this is the lower level problem. Yeah, so this is the general idea of how we've used, I guess, this complementarity modeling, I guess, twice for this for this paper. So this is, the bilevel problem that we saw for the fidelity recovery phase. Yeah.
Views on the last step. How would you know the optimal?
Yeah. So there's two ways. Like, either you assume that you could calculate this, that, so this is the optimal follower dual variable for one given data. So either you assume that the follower divulging this wouldn't break privacy, right? Or you try to forecast it based on like some historical data of like their best response to different points, basically. So that is what we did. So that does add, again, a bit of noise to like, because you actually don't know this true optimal one. You have to estimate it based on some historical data and just using some available data, publicly available data. So that does degrade a little bit compared to assuming that you could actually know this.
Why didn't you just simply use those historical data instead of this whole method?
Because basically then you wouldn't kind of have this, you would still have some myopic way, because you might expect some optimal solution, but then you would dispatch differently, and then that would change actually this optimal response endpoint. So that we tried this, and then you would end up with something that is closer to the myopic solution. Yes, we did. We did try using those. So then, so we did this to add some privacy so that we could make this whole coordination thing a bit more practical and not assume that you have perfect information, basically. And I guess there's some, and then what we saw is that you could achieve some trade-off between the privacy and the fidelity goals, right? So compared to the Laplace mechanism, when you increase the level of noise, then you can see that there's an explosion kind of in the suboptimality of the leader's solution. But with this method, it doesn't change actually this level of suboptimality. It remains fairly bounded. And then that's also the case for the follower. Actually, for the follower, what we observed is that it didn't matter that much if you increase the level of privacy. It didn't impact the follower too much. And I guess one explanation that I can have intuitively is that if you add more and more privacy on the follower's data, that kind of reduces a little bit the strategic advantage that the leader might have, right? So for them, having more privacy is not inherently bad, right? So that doesn't degrade their optimal solution. But you can see that also that is also minimized, that's also reduced, but not to the same order of magnitude, right, compared to the leader. So this method still doesn't impact the follower. And then we tested this under different operating conditions on the heat load and the electricity load and different stresses in the different systems to see if, like, maybe when you have, you know, higher prices in the electricity market or lower prices, that might change actually this optimality loss. But yeah, we saw that it performs better under any operating conditions than the classic mechanism. Yeah, so yeah, one idea we had was that you could try to kind of like already identify some operating conditions for which it is more, this privacy issue is more problematic, because there's some operating condition that, yeah, it doesn't really matter what the heat system does, right? So in this case, you don't need to solve all of this. You can do something much simpler. And yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that's more or less one example of how we try to use it in a way that benefited the system as well. Yeah, do you have other questions? It is 12.